Good morning or afternoon, wherever you're calling in from. We'd like to thank everyone for joining this webinar today in a series of ATFL webinars with prominent figures in Lebanon. Thank you very much. On behalf of ATFL, I'd like to welcome Prime Minister Najib Mikati and thank him for being with us today. He is, as you know, the three-time Prime Minister of Lebanon during some of its most turbulent times. And he's also been a successful businessman and he's been a great interlocutor with the United States. Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Gabriel. I'm very delighted to be with our ATFL dialogue today.
Good to have you. Today, we'd like to discuss the international concerns regarding the escalation of Lebanon's southern border and explore with you, Mr. Prime Minister, what it would take to bring peace and stability to Lebanon. Before we get into these issues, however, let me just discuss the escalation of hostilities this past week with the Iranian-backed militant drone that killed 3 U.S. troops and injured, I think, nearly 40 others. It's a very sad situation for us in the United States. What do you make of all of that? And where are we headed with it, do you think, based upon what just happened this week? Are we in a regional war already?
I can say we are. It is deeply concerned to see the escalation of hostilities in the region, particularly the recent attacks on U.S. forces and the retaliatory strikes by the U.S. and UK. The involvement of regional players in these attacks is a cause for a serious concern. It's a cause for serious concern, as it has the potential of further destabilization of the region, and plus escalation tensions between various parties that can lead to a snowball that I mentioned a few times. It's a kind of an iceberg or snowball effect, and this is, since situation in the Middle East is complex with various regional and international actors involved, it is important for all parties to exercise restraint and work towards this escalation, this situation. So there is a risk, yes, there is a risk that the current hostilities could lead to a wider regional conflict, and it's crucial for all stakeholders to put dialogue and diplomacy at top priority in order to prevent further escalation. In terms of Lebanon, we are doing our best, always to say we are looking for peace. We are looking for peace. Enough is enough. We don't want war. We honored and we respect all international Security Council resolution. We respect the 1701, and the escalation border, definitely it is a cause of concern for me. Lebanon is calling for respecting all the international resolution, and what we are looking for stability, for long-term stability in our border.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. You really opened the door to a number of questions that we've received from our policy group here in Washington. And let me just start by mentioning that you proposed a 3-part peace plan some time ago, which you said may be Gaza's best chance for peace. Can you give us a summary of that? Have you made any progress with it? Relatedly, too, Arab capitals are now working on a peace plan that would create a pathway for for a Palestinian state in exchange for Saudi-Israeli normalization. So both your peace plan and what you're hearing from the region in terms of peace plans.
At the beginning, after 7th of October and a week later, I had an interview and I proposed the 3 steps. The 3 steps concern of how we can end this 75 years old conflict. It will start by a ceasefire in Gaza, exchange hostages, and then looking for and then we look for a permanent peace plan, which consists of two states between Palestinians and Israelis. Now today, what I am proposing and my concern is about Lebanon, and especially about how I can look and to see the front between Lebanon, the fight between Lebanon and Israel. What I'm looking is what I said, the milestone, and we have to initiate and to start by a ceasefire in Gaza. It doesn't mean I am linking together, but it's clear what's going on in Gaza has a reflect on Red Sea, has a reflect on even on the American election, has a reflect on Iraq, has a reflect on Jordan, has a reflect everywhere. So what I'm saying, the milestone, it has to start with a ceasefire in Gaza. That's number one. Second, here we see how we can make a certain redeployment in the south of Lebanon, and especially to go into Lebanese army forces to fulfill the job with UNIFIL as Resolution 1701 dictate. And third, we start to fix for once and for all the border between Lebanon and Israel as it was signed at the Truce Treaty in 1949. Whenever we clear this point, then we can say we have a long-term stability, and it will give a kind of stability in both sides of the border.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about 1701, if you'd like. Western diplomats have been promoting the implementation of it a lot lately as a path towards the resolution of the Lebanon-Israeli conflict. We've got a panel following our interview together on this very subject. You know, UN Resolution 1701, I should say, was passed in August of 2006 to end the Hezbollah-Israeli war, to reaffirm Lebanon's sovereignty and to provide a cessation of hostilities. What is your position on UN Resolution 1701? Can it be realistically be implemented? And is there anything you would change to make it more viable to constituencies in Lebanon?
First of all, I'm not looking to change any international Security Council resolution. We have to maintain, to stay on maintaining the resolution 1701 and to be fully implemented. Lebanese government, since day one, has reaffirmed Lebanon commitment to UN resolution, including resolution 1701, which calls for a ceasefire in the south and the deployment of the Lebanese armed forces in southern Lebanon. Lebanon has always respect and implement these UN resolutions in order to maintain long-term stability in the region. This is clear in all ministerial statement in front of the parliament. It is reflecting the excellent relationship. This ministerial statement always say we respect and we have to implement fully all resolutions since 1949, all the resolution concerning the issue between Lebanon and Israel, we respect and we would like to honor and to put it in place. And this is very important. And yesterday, let's say, I had the head of UNIFIL, and it shows how we are in a very good relation with UNIFIL and in order to maintain the security in the south. Yes.
Mr. Prime Minister, you know, it's good to hear that, but 1701 hasn't been implemented. So why? Are there concessions that need to be made? What will it take to really implement 1701?
Yes, definitely 1701 was not implemented and not put in place because during the last 14 years or over, we had 35,000 Israeli violations to 1701. Let's stop this violation, and then we can say how we can implement this. Lebanon's air, land, and sea. Every day they are violated by Israel. So let us put an end for this. That's what I'm saying. We are looking for peace, and we are looking for long-term stability. You imagine whenever I am saying we are looking for peace, we are looking for peace. Lebanons, they don't have the option for war. What's for war is for? It's a lose-lose situation. We are looking for win-win situation, and that's what's going to happen because we respect the International Security Council resolution, and it has to be implemented in full for both sides.
Thank you. Let me get into a little bit of this, though. The only way to achieve peace in the South, some say, is for the area between the Litani River and Blue Line to be free of arms from armed groups. Hezbollah's capabilities to strike Israel certainly extend beyond the Litani, 30 kilometers, and Israel also has the capability, I hate to say it, but to go as far north into Lebanon as they want. In essence, civilians in both countries would still be at risk, wouldn't they, with 1701? What difference does it really make? What would guarantee that peace, Mr. Prime Minister, and security? And one other thing, is Lebanon even capable of implementing 1701? Where does the parliament stand? Where does Hezbollah stand on this?
If all Lebanese they agree upon one issue, is to honor and to respect 1701. I didn't hear one party or anyone saying he is against 1701. 1701, we all maintain and would like to honor this resolution in full.
So if we don't get the 1701 fully, and we have some information here in Washington that, well, I'll say this, Presidential Envoy Huckstein, who's doing a fabulous job, by the way, for us, for both countries, has said, look, I'm going to say,
by the way, he is doing an extremely good job, and he's doing his best to achieve, let's say, this, what we call it, a long-term stability for this.
So I have a question for you at the end about President Biden, and we'll get there. But in this sense, can it be fully implemented at this time? If not, what are some of the elements leading to that? In other words, what is 1, 2, 3? Is there a roadmap that you, Huckstein, the Israelis, can start to implement? What's the most important thing? What's the second most important thing? Third, and do you get to 1701 eventually? Fully implementation of 1701.
Today, in my opinion, and I'm saying again, it is not linked because, but the whole, we have to create the whole atmosphere for this. A cessation of casualties and a cessation of hostilities in Gaza. That's one. Second, we look in the between the both sides of the border for redeployment of troops, and at the same time, we start to get the Lebanese army forces go into south of Litani and coordination and support and help of UNIFIL, and they can create really a good force to implement the 1701. Meanwhile, we go into diplomatic negotiation to fix all the points at the blue line, at the border between Lebanon and Israel. As you know, we have a dispute today about 13 points. 7 points almost we are it's under control. 6 points still we are far away to achieve an agreement. The day we have to discuss the 6 points. If we achieve it, we will have this we will be back to the truce treaty signed in 1949. It will be implemented, and 1701 will be, and then it will guarantee the stability in the south of Lebanon and south of Litani specifically. That's the point.
Well, I'm getting some good reactions, by the way, from the audience in terms of your answers. But let me just say this. Why is it necessary for a ceasefire in Gaza to be put in place before you reach an agreement on 1701? You know, you've said the possibility of war in Lebanon needs to be conditioned on the resolution of hostilities just now. Mr. Prime Minister, yeah, go ahead.
You have to be practical. You have to be practical. It's not linked. From day one, we are saying 1701. We want peace. We want win-win situation. We are not looking, but let's say I'm saying we have to create the atmosphere for starting negotiation. I cannot start negotiation today, and the second day I have problem in the Red Sea. I have problem in Iraq. I have problem here and there. True, it's not linked, but let's be practical. I would like to achieve a solution. Solution will start by cessation of hostilities in Gaza, and then we will have the right time to start to negotiate for implementation. That's what I'm saying. My opinion. It's not people that are linking, and why I am saying in Gaza and it's conditional. It's not conditional. If I can start today, I can start. But I'm saying it's impossible to start if we are in this kind of region and atmosphere. You have to sit here and to know what's going on.
So I think it's important.
All this blood in Gaza and destruction in Gaza, and I'm saying, okay, I am going to negotiate with Israel for my 6 points. Why I'm saying we stop this kind of cessation of hostilities in Gaza, and then I'm putting the immediately LAF will go into south of Litani, and we see how we can start our diplomacy, start to agree upon the points on the borderline and the red and the blue line, and then it will be done.
Mr. Prime Minister, I hate to be provocative with you.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. You know, Hezbollah said the same thing. No peace till the end of the ceasefire. Are you representing Hezbollah or your own views in this sense?
In fact, I mentioned this before, and as you mentioned, during the first week after 7th of October, I mentioned that this ceasefire in Gaza has to start. Has nothing. I'm presenting myself. I'm representing the interest of Lebanon, and that's what I am seeing to the interest of Lebanon to start to implement 1701. But start today. To tell you, frankly speaking, it's not practically and possibly to be implemented. No, but you tell me a link. It's not a matter of a conditional. I'm saying, and I am not saying conditional. I wish to start today, but if the whole region is on fire, I would say I'm going to talk about long-term stability in Lebanon. It will not be feasible. It will not be in place.
Yeah, I've heard in Washington the same answer, by the way, and they phrase it by saying, whether we like it or not, resolution of all these conflicts goes through Gaza. The road leads through Gaza, and that's unfortunate. So I really appreciate your candor on that. Let me turn briefly to domestic affairs, if I can. Just one question. We'll go back to the peace. It isn't surprising that some in the country, which hasn't had in this country which hasn't had a president for more than a year, say that the country's not effective. You'll recall that I made a statement a few months ago, which you corrected me on, and I said nobody's on the other end of the line during this most important time. We need a president to answer the phone when heads of state call. You said, I think you said, you're on the other end of the line right now. How much of not having a president really affects resolution of these matters? And then secondly, can the Quint help? What does the quintet need to do, the 5 countries, Friends of Lebanon, need to do to be helpful on a presidency?
The Quint now today they have one objective, and for the first time, I see that they are united and they have one single message. That's what they presented the day before yesterday to the speaker, and it was very, very clear message. So today, the presidential vacuum in Lebanon has indeed posed significant challenges during especially this very critical time. The absence of president has resulted lack of I can say constitutional governance and lack of structure of constitutional institution. I'm taking let's say a caretaker today, president. I'm trying to do myself the best to try to guide, to navigate in this very, very difficult time. Even as you know, part of the ministers, they are boycotting the cabinet, especially the FPM. They are not present, but this definitely is resulting in a partial handicapped cabinet, and it's very challenging to safeguard the Lebanese national equilibrium. Quentin, they are trying to resolve the problem. We need them, and we need that they will be united. And the message they passed the day before yesterday, as I mentioned to speaker, I believe it's very difficult and it's very important and critical, and it will lead to hopefully soon to have a president. It's not easy, Lebanon, to have a president. We have to have a consensus president. Can today, with this fragmented society, to get a consensus, it's not easy, but definitely by the help of Quentin, we can get there, and we can achieve, and hopefully in their dialogue and their all the dialogue here in Lebanon between the Lebanese and the Quentin interference, will get a president soon.
So what was their message? You said they delivered a very unified message. What was their message?
You have to ask, I'm saying they passed the message to the speaker. It is in the hand of the speaker and in their hand. They promised to see me next week. So whenever they will meet and they pass the message directly, maybe I will tell.
Well, I can say ATFL really believes strongly that the Quint should get their act together, speak with one voice and one message. I don't think it's their job to elect a president, but it surely is their job to help facilitate your discussions. And I hope that that's the message that was given. We'll have to talk about that a little more. We have a few more minutes, if you don't mind, Mr. Prime Minister. Let's talk about Special Envoy Huckstein, who we both have really talked very positively about. What did he carry with him to Lebanon recently, and will his efforts cool the tensions? Has he convinced the Israelis to back down? And what will they want in return, the Israelis? Give us a sense of those talks to the extent you can.
Frankly speaking, he is doing his job, I can say, perfectly. What he said, and he was very clear that diplomatic solution should be in place. United States could delay Israel from any severe attack on Lebanon, but it cannot stop Israel if it's not stopped from both sides. And he put, let's say, a kind of a plan, which in my opinion, it's highly acceptable. And this plan will start with cessation of hostilities in Gaza. And then we go to number 2 and 3, and how we can put this really in place to the interest, to the security of people, to security of civilians in both sides of the border.
So do you expect him to come for a visit anytime soon?
I don't know his agenda, but definitely I expect he will shuttle between Lebanon and Israel soon.
I think it's important to tell our audience too that although a lot of this is, dependent on what happens in Gaza, I really it's important to say that doesn't mean that Huckstein and his team aren't actively involved, traveling back and forth in really trying to gear up for that solution the day after. So it's important for us to make that clear that they're not waiting on others. One or two more questions, if you don't mind. How is the Biden administration doing in support of Lebanon overall, both from humanitarian, LAF, et cetera? How do you rate the Biden administration? Are they giving you the attention that you need, given the real sense of urgency and importance that Lebanon has right now?
Ed, you are the one who really knows what the USA administration is doing for the Lebanese armed force, and we are one of the highest armies that they are supported by United States administration. And here I can say I highly appreciated the Biden administration commitment to avoiding the spillover also of the Israeli-Hamas conflict into Lebanon. And they are doing their best, as I mentioned, that what Mr. Amos said. And really, I'm very thankful if they will continue their job, and they make the right pressure on Israel to stop, to slip over the war into region, and they have to stop in a way or another to get peace and long-term stability. And it is time now to look for the peace in the region. After 75 years, what we get from war. In 1982, Israel invaded Beirut. Here we have been invaded, and to kill the Palestinian issue. Did they kill it? Did they eliminate the Palestinian? Today they say they would like to eliminate Hamas. Could they eliminate Hamas? No, they could not eliminate Hamas. Hamas could eliminate it by giving them their right of live in one independent state, Palestinian state, giving the right of Palestinian people. That's what we are looking for. That we have to stress, not to forget after tomorrow what's happened today. We have to work all together to get peace and to have security for all people of the region. What I'm saying about Palestinian, I would like to have security for all, even for Israel. But we'd like, in a way or another, we have to live into a peaceful environment.
Thank you, sir. We got a lot of questions from the audience. You've addressed most of them. This has been a very helpful half hour. A great job. But here's one for you. What's your position on the national defense strategy?
My position in the national defense strategy in Lebanon?
Yes.
Yes, to support the Lebanese army forces fully, and Lebanese army forces, they have to play a good role. It is one of the institutions that it's united all Lebanese inside, and we are looking to the left to play a great role in this what we are calling long-term stability in the south. The role now it's for the left to play it. That's why my national strategy today: stability. We had enough war, enough fight. We'd like to have stability in order to look to our domestic issues, especially economically, and to get our economically safe and healthy again.
Very good. Do you think that you could, that under your leadership, you can move on a national strategy, or will that require the election of a president?
No, we prefer to have a president, definitely, to lead a dialogue, and we see what we can do then. But no, definitely it will create. It's very sensitive that I lead anything like this today in our society, and we have to have a president, definitely.
Okay. So we didn't get a chance to answer all the questions, unfortunately. The number
to be continued next time.
You got a deal. So let me just say, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your candor and your time today, and in informing, U.S. policymakers that are on this call, key ATFL members and members of the diaspora across the country on these issues facing Lebanon, as well as your thoughts on how to protect Lebanon. from further erosion. I must commend you and your family, especially your wife and the entire family, for your continued service to your country. And we want to thank you for being so available to answer these questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. I hope you can tune in for the rest of the show. If not, we will give you a summary.
Thank you, Ed, and I wish to see you soon in Lebanon, inshallah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'd now like to turn to our colleague and moderator for the next panel, Patricia Karam. She's going to engage two very prominent policymakers on the history, the challenges, and the current opportunity to implement 1701. And thank you very much, Patricia, and our panelists for this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Patricia Karam. I'm a senior advisor at ATFL. I'm also a non-resident scholar at Arab Center and MEI. I will moderate this distinguished panel, which will be followed by a Q&A. I do encourage the audience to submit their questions in the Q&A mode of the meeting, so we can put together a good script. But first, let me introduce the speakers. Dr. Tarek Mitri is the president of St. George University of Beirut and former special representative of the United Nations Secretary General in Libya. Dr. Mitri was also a minister in 4 Lebanese governments, Minister of Information, of Environment, of Administrative Development, and of Culture, and he was acting foreign minister. Dr. Mitri will delve into the genesis of the UN Security Council Resolution 1701 as the resolution that ended the 2006 conflict that led to the withdrawal of Israeli forces and established between the Blue Line and the Litani River an area free of armed personnel, assets, and weapons other than the government, or was supposed to other than the government of Lebanon and UNIFIL. And Ambassador Feltman, Ambassador Jeffrey Feltman is the visiting fellow at Brookings, but he also served as special envoy for the Horn of Africa for the Department of State. He was also a senior fellow at the Washington-based United Nations Foundation and a distinguished fellow at Asia Society Policy Institute. Before Brookings, he really served for nearly 6 years as Undersecretary General for Political Affairs at the UN in New York. Ambassador Feltman was also a U.S. Foreign Service officer for over 26 years. He was Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs. And before that, he served as U.S. Ambassador to Lebanon, but was also previously in Erbil, in Baghdad, in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, in Tunis, in Amman, in Budapest, and Port-au-Prince. So Ambassador Feltman, I keep wanting to make you a doctor, will analyze current US-led efforts to find a diplomatic solution, and by the same token, the return to prominence 18 years later of UN Security Resolution 1701. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Dr. Mitri. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. The periodical report of the Secretary General of the United Nations on the implementation of Resolution 1701 during the period June 21st to October 20th, 2023, is gravely concerned by the breaches of the cessation of hostilities along the Blue Line since October 8. The report adds that the exchanging of fire underscores serious concerns regarding the possession of unauthorized weapons outside the authority of the state. On the other hand, the report mentions the continued Israeli violations of Resolution 1701, namely the occupation of the northern part of the Lebanese village Gaza and the frequent entering of Israeli forces into Lebanese airspace. The report stresses also the importance of a strong and well-resourced Lebanese armed forces, which remains central to the successful implementation of Resolution 1701. It remains that between August 2006, when the resolution was adopted, and October 8, 2023, that is 17 years, there were no major exchanges of fire across the border. Prior to October 8, the situation in the UNIFIL, United Nations Interim Force in southern Lebanon, the situation in its areas of operation has been relatively stable, in spite of the partial implementation of 1701. Now, Resolution 1701 referred to security arrangements to prevent the resumption of hostilities, including the establishment between the Blue Line and the Litani River of an area free of any armed personnel, assets, and weapons other than those of the government of Lebanon and UNIFIL. Such arrangements were made in the year 2006 on the assumption that what we do not see does not exist. Since 2006, Hezbollah did not fully withdraw from the area between the Litani and the Blue Line, but it tried not to be visible and did limit its military activities to the lowest possible extent. There were very few punctual operations, mostly in the areas of Shebaa farms. Now, a few words about the genesis of Resolution 1701. In 2006, the Israeli government held the Lebanese government responsible for the Hezbollah attacks, although our government, the government of Lebanon at that time, did not condone the action of Hezbollah. The declared Israeli war objective was to destroy or degrade Hezbollah, just as the war objective in Gaza is to destroy or degrade Hamas. But soon, it involved destroying Lebanon's infrastructure and displacing civilian population. 1 million Lebanese were displaced in 2006. Lebanon pleaded for an immediate ceasefire, but had to wait 33 days to obtain a cessation of hostilities. US officials repeatedly stated that they will call for a ceasefire only when the conditions of its durability are fulfilled. In the words of John Bolton, the US permanent representative at the UN at that time, the process of drafting the 1701 resolution was intentionally delayed. Efforts towards the resolution progressed as it became apparent that Hezbollah would not be defeated. In fact, and far from degrading Hezbollah, the 2006 war, many of us claim, emboldened this party and entrenched it in the power structures of Lebanon. In theory, the Resolution 1701 should have paved the way for a ceasefire that has more permanence than a cessation of hostility. But that did not happen. Cessation of hostilities, as you probably know, is a little less than a ceasefire and is therefore a little more precarious than a ceasefire. Resolution 1701 was voted in the Security Council only when the US de facto veto was lifted. Until the last minute, the US wanted the resolution to be adopted under Chapter 7. Lebanon, by decision of its government, had insisted on a Chapter 6 resolution. While we were open to the use of Chapter 7 language in some parts of the resolution, the sentence about the use of all necessary measures comes to mind. You know, before the start of this panel, I was having a chat with Jeff, who reminded me how much Condoleezza Rice herself, in conversation with Prime Minister Siniora, took part in the drafting the final text of 1701. I was in New York at that time and trying to work with Ambassador Bolton on the text. And it's clear to me that my Prime Minister's effort with Secretary Rice was far easier and more successful than the discussions I've had with Bolton. Was trying to delay the adoption of the resolution, insisted on Chapter 7, knowing fairly well that Lebanon is not in a position to accept a resolution on Chapter 7. Relatedly, the establishment of a new multinational force was on the table. Lebanon, with a strong European support, opted for an enhanced UN interim force. France, Italy, Spain, Germany, Greece, Denmark, and others were troop contributors, providing the peacekeeping mission with an unprecedented political clout. Now, in recent months, the US diplomatic initiative, there's many references by our Prime Minister to Hochstein's shuttle diplomacy, if this is the way to call it, the US diplomatic initiative to facilitate the land border delineation between Lebanon and Israel. Such an initiative might be able to facilitate the implementation in due time of Resolution 1701. In this context, it is appropriate to remind ourselves of the resolution's affirmation of the internationally recognized borders of Lebanon, not just the blue line, the internationally recognized borders of Lebanon as contemplated by the Israeli-Lebanese Armistice Agreement in 1949. In addition, it is worth noting that the resolution's oblique reference, the 1701 resolution, has an oblique reference to the possibility of placing Shib'a farms under the jurisdiction of the United Nations until Lebanese sovereignty over them is settled. Today, the dangers of miscalculations and the risk of broadening the conflict in the south are ever present. The putative diplomatic efforts, French, American, German, and more recently British, those diplomatic efforts towards an agreement on the full implementation of Resolution 1701 have fallen short so far of fully engaging the parties concerned, and the parties being the government of Israel and Hezbollah. A ceasefire in Gaza, even if it is only a long humanitarian pause, would create conditions. Never mind, I mean, Prime Minister Mikati used another language, but I would suggest that a ceasefire in Gaza, even if it's a long humanitarian pause and not a ceasefire, would create conditions that may be conducive to an agreement. Calling for the full implementation of Resolution 1701 is a Lebanese obligation. No government worthy of the name cannot but affirm the need to fully implement this resolution. But political realism, as Najib Mikati has said a while ago, requires that Hezbollah accepts this full implementation, especially the paragraph 8 that refers to withdrawing from the area between the Litani River and the Blue Line. And Hezbollah has made it clear and loud that this won't happen until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. The Paris negotiations on the hostages and the possibility of a humanitarian pause might be a window of opportunity for the full implementation of this resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mitri. And I hear you saying that there are two kind of components to a successful implementation, full implementation of 1701. One being a ceasefire, because it would create the conditions, and two, being a land border, negotiations on land border delineation. Okay. With that, let me turn it over to Ambassador Feltman, who will give us more of a perspective on the U.S. led efforts to find a solution, and perhaps even his thoughts on everything that Dr. Mitri suggested.
Thank you, Patricia, and thanks to ATFL for inviting me. It's a real honor to be part of this panel with someone who I have such respect for, Dr. Tarek Mitri, who of course was a minister during my time in Lebanon, and I also worked with him when he was at the United Nations. And I have incredible respect for Prime Minister Najib Mikati, who has stepped up repeatedly to try to steer the ship of state of Lebanon into safer waters during some of the most turbulent times in Lebanon's modern history. So it's an honor to be here, having listened to the Prime Minister and to listen to Dr. Mitri's comments. I mean, the situation right now is extremely dangerous, and I agree with the Prime Minister, with Dr. Tarek, that having the ceasefire in Gaza that's being worked on in Paris would be essential to trying to calm the situation, to trying to build some space, to trying to create the atmosphere by which one can talk about other issues. So whether we're talking about the Houthis in the Red Sea or we're talking about the Lebanon-Israel border. So I fully concur that a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza, primarily to relieve the pressure in Gaza to let the hostages go back to their families in Israel, is key to creating the atmosphere to deal with some of these other issues. But I am worried about the ongoing situation now. I don't believe that Hezbollah is interested in full-scale war with Israel, but miscalculations happen. There's been this tit-for-tat firing across the northern, between the Israeli-Lebanese border since October 8th. And the situation, I would say, would be intolerable for both countries. You have tens of thousands of Israeli citizens, tens of thousands of Lebanese citizens who cannot go back to their homes because it's not safe to do so. So it's intolerable, the situation right now. And second, there's the high risk of an accidental war, as happened, at least according to Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah in 2006. Hezbollah did not believe, according to Nasrallah, they were crossing an Israeli red line and abducting and killing Israeli soldiers across the border into Israel. But it happened, and a war broke out. So I worry every day that even if there's not an intention for a full-scale war, it could happen. And at some point, one of the parties or the other is going to decide that the situation is intolerable to let tens of thousands of people remain displaced and go forward. So that brings us up to 1701. I don't think it's surprising that people are looking again at this resolution that was passed unanimously 18 years ago. And it's I would love to talk to Dr. Tarek sometime about the history of this, but I will, for the sake of time, I'll look more forward. I mean, it seems to me that 1701 can be viewed today as a blueprint for de-escalation of the current situation, a blueprint for a return to a mutual respect of the 1949 armistice agreement that the Prime Minister and Dr. Mitri both referred to, a blueprint for the safe return of displaced Lebanese and Israeli civilians to their communities. But a blueprint's just a sketch. How do we turn this sketch into an edifice in reality? I think it's worth keeping in mind that 1701 is not a resolution that was passed in isolation. It builds on previous resolutions. It built on previous understandings. The Prime Minister mentioned the Lebanese-Israeli armistice agreement of 1949. That was facilitated by a legendary UN diplomat, Ralph Bunche. And then jumping ahead to 2004, September 2004, Resolution 1559 is often remembered in Lebanon as well as in Washington as calling for the withdrawal of foreign forces, meaning Syrian occupying forces. But it also reaffirmed this idea of Lebanese sovereignty and independence, reinforced the idea of trying to have stability in this area. Resolution 1680, which was passed just 2 months before the outbreak of that 2006 war, again, was emphasizing Lebanese sovereignty, Lebanese independence, the need to resolve issues that would lead to tensions between Lebanon and Israel. And then you had 1701 that created the conditions for the cessation of hostilities in August of 2006. All of these resolutions are trying to reinforce the idea of stability in this region. 1701 had more specific language because of the fact that there was a war underway. But they all talk about several elements. And let's be frank, neither Lebanon nor Israel have lived up to 1701. Both sides have failed to implement 1701. Dr. Mitri talked about northern Gaza. The Israelis are occupying northern Gaza, which is inarguably part of Lebanese territory. The Israeli overflights are a violation of 1701. They're a violation of Lebanese sovereignty. They're a violation of 1701's call for respect to the blue line. But let's talk about Hezbollah. Dr. Mitri talked about some of the conditions by which Hezbollah might be more amenable to at least acting in the spirit of 1701. But 1701, like 1680, like 1559, called for the disarmament of all Lebanese and non-Lebanese militias. Hezbollah has moved in the opposite direction since 2006. Hezbollah's arsenal is more lethal, more extensive, more diffused geographically throughout Lebanon since 1701 was passed. So Hezbollah has moved in the opposite direction from what 1701 was supposed to be defining as a way to build a more as a way to convert a cessation of hostilities into a more permanent ceasefire. And let's be frank, I don't believe that anything is going to work in terms of 1701 implementation if Hezbollah continues to be the party that defines what happens in Lebanon. That is, if Hezbollah continues to say no to 1701 implementation. You know, Hezbollah insists on having it both ways. It will use its political weight, and its political weight is real, I recognize that, and intimidation to stop whatever it doesn't like from the Lebanese government. And at the same time, it will prevent the Lebanese government from exercising any oversight into its own decisions. You know, so basically, Hezbollah is deciding questions of war and peace for Lebanon without any reference to Lebanon's people. There's almost a contempt for Lebanon's institutions, for Lebanon's constitutional order, for the elected representatives of Lebanon. And moreover, I would argue, without excusing the Israeli violations of 1701, which are documented by the UN and others, that Hezbollah's weapons are what create the very dangers that Hezbollah claims its weapons are there to deter. Israeli overflights over Lebanon, as I said, are a clear violation of 1701, a clear violation of Lebanese sovereignty. They're absolutely contrary to the respect of the blue line that's demanded in 1701. But for all of us who talk to the Israelis about respecting Lebanon's sovereignty, it would be a heck of a lot easier to make a persuasive case to Israel if it was clear that Hezbollah's arms smuggling, Hezbollah's stranglehold over Lebanese government decision-making had ended. But now trying to look forward in a more hopeful way. I am going to go back into history, but a different history than what Dr. Mitri talked about in terms of the adoption of 1701. I want to go back to 2005 because I see a potential model for today. The Syrian military and intelligence withdrawal from Lebanon in the spring of 2005. A year earlier, that would have seemed impossible. That would have seemed a pipe dream that the Syrian military and intelligence assets that had been occupying Lebanon for more than 20 years since the end of Lebanon's civil war would have withdrawn peacefully. But it happened. It did. It happened. And how? And I think it was the fact that the majority of Lebanese and key external actors came together in the aftermath of the assassination of Prime Minister Rafik Hariri and then were intently focused on the same goal. Imagine in March 2005, after the assassination of Prime Minister Hariri and the deaths of all those that were killed along with him. Imagine had the Lebanese gone out to protest and the rest of the world was looking the other way. We were distracted by what was happening elsewhere. We weren't watching Lebanon. The Lebanese demonstrations would have been crushed. Or imagine had the Lebanese gone on with their lives and not reacted at all to what happened on February 14, 2005, but France and the United States were sounding the alarm bells, nothing would have happened. It was the combination of key external actors and the Lebanese and the majority of Lebanese public moving in the same direction, focused on the same goals, that I think led to the decision of Damascus that there was no choice but to withdraw. And whatever the disappointments that the Lebanese have over developments since 2005, I think this is a model that we need to be looking at today. If there were strong Lebanese support for the implementation of 1701, as the Prime Minister and Dr. Mitri have both said, and there was tangible international support in this way, and there was an intense focus to do so, I think that the Prime Minister's three-point plan that would be supported by an inside-outside partnership, an inside Lebanon, outside Lebanon partnership can in fact change the situation. And something else gives me hope, at least for the short term, not for the long term, but for the short term, in terms of trying to de-escalate and find a way forward in implementation of 1701. For all the distortions that I think Hezbollah has inserted into the Lebanese political system, I do not believe that Hezbollah wants a full-scale war with Israel today. I mean, Nasrallah has said as much, signaled as much. Hezbollah does not want to be blamed for Beirut's cityscape to look like Gaza. Hezbollah's arsenal, in my analysis, is about Iran. It's not really about Lebanon. Its arsenal is far greater than any sensible defense plan for Lebanon would be. This is about deterring Israel from attacking Iran or responding to a significant Israeli attack on Iran. It's not about Lebanon. And Hezbollah is going to want to maintain its arsenal for that goal, which means that in the short term, they're not interested in the war, even though a war could, as I said earlier, accidentally happen. So let's figure out how to build on the Prime Minister's plans, the words that the Prime Minister shared with us this morning, build on Hezbollah's apparent unwillingness to provoke full-scale war, and the Lebanese public's interest in avoiding conflict, to create momentum 18 years later for the implementation of Resolution 1701. And going back to where I started, yes, I do believe that the ceasefire for Gaza is an important element of this, not only in helping the Palestinians and Israelis deal with their issues, but in creating the atmosphere by which we can try to build that inside-outside partnership that I described on behalf of implementing 1701.
Thank you, Ambassador Feltman. We haven't, I'm gonna throw at you a couple of questions that have come up, but first I wanted to ask Dr. Mitri, what would have been, just a minor technical question, what would have been the difference between a chapter 6, between a chapter 7 versus a chapter 6 umbrella for the resolution at the time?
Yeah, the difference is that under Chapter 7, the multinational force in southern Lebanon would be allowed to use every necessary measures, not just to defend itself, but to enforce the implementation of every paragraph in that resolution. That's what Chapter 7 would have meant. The reason why Lebanon insisted on having the resolution adopted under Chapter 6 was that Hezbollah was represented in the Lebanese government. And Hezbollah at that time told us that if this resolution is passed under Chapter 7, then we would consider the United Nations force in southern Lebanon as an occupying force, and we will be fighting against the United Nations force in southern Lebanon. And therefore, out of political realism, our government insisted that we have to have a resolution on Chapter 6. Now, let me say one more thing. I think I do not disagree with what Ambassador Feltman has just said. But I would like to push a little further the comparison that Jeff suggested. You know, a comparison between the situation as it is now and how it was in 2005. Hezbollah is far more entrenched in Lebanon's power structures today than it was at that time. I'm not saying this.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this to celebrate the power of Hezbollah, but just to take due note of the sad reality of Lebanese politics. The second is that in 2005, and Jeff had said that, the majority of Lebanese came together. That's not the case now. They're even unable to elect a president. Those who could have come together to oppose Hezbollah's hegemony over Lebanese politics are not even able to agree on not on a president, but on electing a president. So the reality is far more fragmented today than what it was in 2005. And Hezbollah is far stronger today than it was in 2005. And I think Hezbollah draws a benefit from the fact that it has multiple identities. It's the party of the Shiite community in Lebanon. It claims to want to liberate Lebanon. It works for Iran. It's a regional player. And those different identities have compounded to make Hezbollah stronger than before. So that's the reasoning behind, I think, what both Najib Mikati and myself have done. In 2006, we had a Lebanese government that could negotiate a cessation of hostilities. I'm not sure the Lebanese government today, an interim government that can hardly meet and is able to negotiate a cessation of hostilities in the south. Short of talking to Hezbollah, though indirectly, I don't think any diplomatic initiative will bear fruits.
Well, let me build on that, Ambassador Feldman, and allow you maybe to respond to that. You did kind of, on the one hand, point out to kind of how entrenched Hezbollah was, and that very little is realistically likely to happen on the 1701 implementation, as long as Hezbollah is deciding what you said, war and peace, without reference to Lebanon's people. I had my question was twofold. One, can anything at this juncture, and given the changed state of affairs that Dr. Mitri described, can anything be done to contain Hezbollah? And two, how do you build on the how do you practically put in motion the plan that you proposed for a short-term kind of momentum that leads to some sort of a cessation of hostilities, given the broader context and everything that you talked about?
Okay, thanks. I'm going to, for the purpose of answering your question, Patricia, I'm going to assume that there is a temporary ceasefire, at least a temporary ceasefire in Gaza. Hopefully one would get to a permanent into that conflict for a number of reasons, but because I think I agree with the Prime Minister and Dr. Mitri that even though it's not directly related to Lebanon, that without having some kind of a different approach in Gaza, it's going to be very, very difficult to even have a constructive approach on Lebanon. Particularly because Hezbollah is going to continue to want to be able to show it's part of the axis of resistance, meaning that some of the ideas that Amos Hochstein has been proposing can't be implemented. Hezbollah refused to implement them without that ceasefire. So I'll assume that there's a ceasefire. I mean, you can start to do some things. You've got the there's been some progress on demarcating the international border between Lebanon and Israel. Both sides have disputed some of the areas, so work on that. That's one thing that can be worked on practically, is actually demarcating that border, completing the task of demarcating that border. You have one, and again, one has to deal with the issue of northern Gaza. I mean, for those of you that, I suppose everyone that's following this is very much aware of what happened with Gaza. Gaza is south of the Lebanese border. Northern Gaza is basically suburban areas that were developed by Gaza residents during the Israeli occupation of Lebanon between 1982 and 2000, the southern occupation, and that the Israelis are now maintaining an occupation force inside northern Gaza to prevent a division of Gaza, is their argument, and Israeli citizens living there. And then you've got Sheba Farms, which is a much more complicated issue to deal with. But as Dr. Mitri said, 1701 does call in I think it's paragraph 10 to come up with some way to deal with Sheba Farms. Mm-hmm. Sheba Farms, it's worth noting, was occupied by the Israelis in '67. The Lebanese government did not raise any objections to the Israeli occupation of the area known as Sheba Farms until 2000, and the dispute seems to come about because of very poor demarcation during the French and the British mandatory periods of that left ambiguity. Now that ambiguity needs to be resolved. The ambiguity is one of the justifications that Hezbollah has for its arms. When Hezbollah says Sheba Farms is occupied, therefore we have to be finding ways to liberate Sheba Farms. It's almost like that ends the discussion about Hezbollah's arms, even though, as I would argue, Hezbollah's arms are not really about Hezbollah. So anyway, start dealing with these technical issues. The blue line that was the subject of the armistice of 1949. How you deal with the Israeli violation of Lebanese sovereignty in Gaza. What you do about dealing with, it's very interesting language, dealing with is what's actually in the resolution, dealing with Sheba Farms. So that's one thing you can start to do if the situation is calm. But over the long term, as I said, Hezbollah's arms pose an existential threat to Lebanon. They create the threat that Israel is always on the verge of responding to. And I don't know how, over the long term, one deals with the arms of Hezbollah without a broader regional understanding that I don't see is possible right now. I mean, we're talking about, you know, a deal that would require the U.S. and the Iranians to come to some mutual understanding at a time when Iran is supporting the Russians in Ukraine against which the U.S. would see as an enemy force, that they've provided weaponry and technical training to the Houthis and so forth. So it's very, very hard for me to envision right now the long-term solution that is needed to have a permanent stability between Lebanon and Israel. So I would go for a short-term way to prevent this current escalation from turning into a war. And that I think that's exactly what Amos Hochstein's trying to do. And remember, some of this stuff, as hard as it looks, isn't always impossible. The March 2023 maritime agreement that was facilitated by the United States, by which Lebanon and Israel both accepted a certain understanding on the maritime. It was not direct negotiations between the two parties. That worked to reduce the tensions in terms of maritime. That worked to allow the two countries to start to exploit their offshore hydrocarbon resources. So let's look for some short-term things that de-escalate the current situation, prevent the current situation from turning into a war, even if my imagination is not great enough right now to imagine how you deal with the long-term issue of Hezbollah's arms creating an existential threat for Lebanon because of Israel's understanding of exactly how lethal those arms would be for Israel.
Thank you, Ambassador Feldman. There's actually one question from the audience on that very topic, so I'm going to read it to you. Is there a scenario in which Germany and France can provide security guarantees to Lebanon in exchange for Hezbollah's disarmament, while the US and Great Britain offer the same guarantees to Israel, contingent on Israeli withdrawal from disputed territories? And the question, the comment after that is that we need to resolve this issue once and for all. Otherwise, Lebanon might not only split, but in addition to being a failed state, become a dead state. So that was the comment.
It's a good question. I appreciate it. Thank you. I don't know. My 6 years at the UN made me somewhat skeptical on the idea of guarantors. Take the Budapest Memorandum about the denuclearization of Ukraine, the guarantor powers being Britain, France, and the Russian Federation. That didn't protect Ukraine's sovereignty. It seemed, but to have so-called guarantor powers help build a level of trust and confidence that an understanding is being implemented, I think would be helpful. So if you had a commitment by all sides to the implementation of 1701, for example, that 1701, like the previous resolutions I mentioned, called for the extension of Lebanese government control over all of Lebanese territory. The Prime Minister talked about the conditions by which he could imagine the Lebanese armed forces deployed to the south. So imagine you had some kind of agreement by which 1701 was being fully implemented, that both the Israelis and the Lebanese agreed on the scenario for implementation and full respect of 1701. Yes, you're probably going to need to have some kind of, quote, guarantors, but they're more like observers to help build the trust, to call out the parties if there's a deterioration in there. I mean, I know that the Lebanese and the Israelis have quite a bloody history when they look at each other. The Israelis will talk about the Hezbollah threat. They'll talk about the PLO raids from Lebanon. The Lebanese will talk about the 1982 invasion of Beirut, the 1982 to 2000 occupation, the 2006 war. There's the list of grievances and fears on both sides is long. But so you're going to have respected parties that can say, yes, in fact, the two sides are living up to what's been agreed upon. Yes, in fact, The Israeli overflights have stopped because Hezbollah's arms smuggling has stopped. The Hezbollah's disarming. There's an arrangement by which Lebanon can assert its sovereignty safely over northern Gaza. Sheba Farms is being dealt with in this way. But I think that ultimately the only guarantee that something's going to work is if the two parties themselves, that is Lebanon and Israel, agree on the scenario, and both governments have the ability to implement what they've agreed to. And you know, the Israeli political situation is certainly very complicated as Israel has moved right. You have real extremist ideologues in the current Israeli cabinet. The Israeli cabinet. But Lebanon's ability to implement something will depend on Hezbollah allowing that to go forward.
Thank you. And this is something that also Dr. Mitri echoed in his talk. Let me turn to you very quickly. Couple of technical questions. I'll lump two questions in one just to move us along. But there's a question as to whether if and after 1701's theoretical implementation or re-implementation, how long it would take for both sides to reach a full land border agreement. Though personally, I didn't hear you subjecting the land border agreement to 1701 being re-implemented, the opposite, but perhaps you can clarify. And second, caretaker Prime Minister Mikati touched upon it, how feasible is 1701 to be re-implemented in the absence of a president?
Yes, I think I said that a land border agreement paves the way for the full implementation of 1701. And I will say this time and again. I've heard from a number of European ambassadors who happen to every now and then to visit me, that they've heard from the Speaker of the Parliament, who's an ally of Hezbollah, and who's probably the most influential person in Lebanon today. He's been saying if the delineation of land borders is on the table, then things will fall apart the way they have to. Don't worry about implementing 1701, work on this. Ambassadors have heard Berry say this loud and clear. Now, my second, of course, if you have to have a president to negotiate, you have to have a president to defend the national interests of Lebanon, and to sign an agreement, and all of this. So the election of the president is indispensable in case we want to achieve this full implementation very soon. But there is, perhaps more importantly, I think enhancing the role of the Lebanese army is an important step in that direction. You know, in Resolution 1701, that is 17 years ago, one argument that tipped the balance, so to speak, in favor of adopting the Resolution 1701 without further delay, had it been left to Bolton, it would have taken another month, but was that the Lebanese government had decided to deploy 15,000 Lebanese soldiers in southern Lebanon, in the area south of the Litani River. Now, we committed ourselves to do that, but failed to do it. And presently, there are probably 700 or 800 Lebanese army soldiers stationed in the south. So the stronger is the army, the more it is willing to, I wouldn't say fill the vacuum, but exercise the sovereign authority of the state over a part of Lebanon, I think is crucial.
Thank you, Dr. Mitri. there's a question to Dr. I mean, I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple of questions before the time runs out, but there's a long question, which again, I'm going to read, but it's interesting because it takes us in a different direction. So forming a coalition to implement 1701 a la 1559 resolution in 2005 that really led to the Syrian regime's withdrawal starts also, and that's the commentary, the person who's asking the question is making the comment, starts with the election of a reform-minded Western-leaning president. It also requires a willing and able international community, similar to the Bush, they're making a comparison to the Bush-Iraq era, to provide internal opposition with the support to achieve that objectives. Both are lacking today. So the question is, why is the administration not taking a leading role vis-a-vis Lebanon, both in supporting the internal opposition and pushing for the election of a president?
Well, I can't speak for the U.S. government. I left the U.S. government in 2012, although I did go back to do the Horn of Africa job, but that had very little to do with, if anything, to do with Lebanon. But I know this sounds hard to believe given the size of the U.S. government, but there is a bandwidth problem. There is a bandwidth issue that right now you have a Russia-Ukraine war. You have an incredible competition with China. You have the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea that absorb everything, and you have the Gaza-Israel situation. And no matter how big our bureaucracy is, it goes up to it's a pyramid. It goes up to a few decision makers, and so it's another reason why I think getting a ceasefire in Gaza would free up some time within the United States to be able to focus on Lebanon. But I would disagree with the implication that the U.S. hasn't been involved. I mean, it's been, as I think the Prime Minister knows very, very well, it has been a real effort by this administration to make sure that the support for the Lebanese armed forces continues for the reasons that Tarek Mitri described. There's a lot of skepticism on Capitol Hill about the Lebanese armed forces support program that the United States has been doing, because there's a feeling that the Lebanese armed forces, which I think have had some real successes, particularly against some of the more Sunni extremism, whether or not they really can exercise Lebanese sovereignty in a way that Tarek Mitri described. So it's taken the administration some effort, and look at the amount of time that Amos Hochstein took in trying to resolve the maritime issue. That was not, frankly, that looked like a long shot. That looked like it was not going to be possible. That one felt as though that Hezbollah could very easily create a Sheba Farms in the sea and prevent any kind of agreement. But the administration kept pushing, found a way to come up with something that both the Lebanese and the Israeli governments could accept. So I don't accept the fact. I don't accept the argument that the U.S. has been disengaged. I accept the argument that we could be more engaged if some of the other problems would recede. But in terms of the internal politics of Lebanon, I really think for everyone who thinks that I was somehow manipulating the Lebanese government when I was ambassador, this may sound strange, but I really think it's up to the Lebanese to get their act together. I do not believe that any foreign power it would be appropriate to be trying to put their hands on the scales to tip the presidential elections in one direction or the other. What they can do is be clear on how the international community would respond. If you have this type of president committed to Lebanese sovereignty and independence, committed to 1701 implementation, committed to working on de-escalation of tensions in the region, this is the sort of support package you will get. If you have a Hezbollah mouthpiece, someone subservient entirely to Damascus and Tehran, this is the type of reaction you're going to get. So I think our responsibility is to explain the implications of decisions that the Lebanese themselves need to make.
Thank you, Ambassador Feldman. I want to ask you I want to squeeze in one question, then give you each the opportunity maybe for a 30-second close. That question has to do with the prospects. And again, it takes us just steps away from the current discussion, but But it's interesting. What are the prospects for normalization of Lebanese-Israeli relations post-Gaza? And are there any efforts being exerted here? So I'll let you answer that.
The goal is to prevent a regional war. The goal is to prevent an all-out, full-scale Israeli-Lebanese war. The goal is to try to find some way to stabilize the situation so that you don't have repeated firing across the blue line as we've seen in both directions since October 7th that allows the Lebanese civilians and the Israeli civilians that live near the border to go home. I think normalization is something to talk about way in the future. But it's not the current focus. The current focus is let's prevent this very dangerous situation from turning into full-scale war.
Thank you. And let me turn it quickly to Dr. Mitri. Maybe you can give us 30 seconds of closing comments.
For whatever normalization some people hope for, you need a ceasefire in Gaza and a political process along the lines of the Arab Peace Initiative. I know some insist that it's dead and buried, but short of a global agreement that would grant the Palestinians an independent state, there's hardly a chance that a country like Lebanon would be able to normalize its relationships with Israel.
Ambassador Feldman, any closing words?
I think I would just, again, emphasize the fact that even if we all assume, as I do, that Hezbollah doesn't want war, that 2006, a long time ago, is a stark reminder that wars can happen accidentally, and that this current situation is simply dangerous and it's intolerable, that tens of thousands of Lebanese and Israeli civilians cannot go home.
Thank you. That's, a good place to end. We're at almost 11:30. I want to thank you all for joining the call, for participating, and for giving us these tremendous insights into a situation that is sadly not a happy situation. But thank you all, and thanks to the audience for tuning in. To be continued.
Thanks.
Thank you.